Hey there, welcome back to Geeky Greenhouse. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to grow bush beans from start to finish. So bush beans and pole beans are two very easy crops to grow. It's one of the most set it and forget it plants you can grow in your garden, and today we're going to show you the process that we use to grow them from start to finish. So let's start inside by soaking and planting our seeds. So we will be starting the beans from seed and direct sowing outdoors, but we first soaked the beans overnight just in some room temperature water, and that sort of softens the outer layer and allows for better germination rates. So when you do this, the bean will change from a hard texture to a softer texture, so just be careful not to squeeze them too hard at the time of planting. So now that the beans are soaked, let's go outside and plant them. Okay, so we found a suitable place in our raised bed outside and we're ready to plant our soaked beans. Beans can actually be planted pretty close together, much closer than you might expect. So we're gonna plant one bean every 4 inches. So if you're doing square foot gardening, you can plant about 9 beans in every square foot. So we've got just about 9 of each of these varieties, and so we'll be covering this small area here. So I just like to guesstimate using a thumb and the pinky and just kind of make divots where each of the beans should be planted. And beans are pretty large for seeds, so you can plant them pretty deep, between 1/2 inch and 1 inch, but I usually go about 1 inch down below the surface. So again, carefully just taking each of the beans, pressing them into the holes, just dropping one in each. And then switching to our other variety. It's worth mentioning that you can plant your beans indoors in seed starter plugs, but they don't really like being transplanted, and they do perfectly well being sown directly in the ground like this. So you'll want to cover each of them up with the surrounding soil. So again, about 1 inch. If it collapsed on you, try to push it down a bit. This is really just for positioning them, so get them about 1 inch below the surface. And now you want to thoroughly water and make sure that those seeds are very moist. You can see the soil is pretty dry on the surface here, so I'm just going to water thoroughly this whole area. And we'll want to keep it watered for the entire duration of germination. Make sure that the seeds don't dry out as they're germinating. So beans germinate best in warm temperatures. You shouldn't plant them if there's any risk of frost in the future. So make sure you're doing this in the springtime after your last frost date. And another thing to consider is succession planting. So we've planted some now. In another week or 2 weeks, we should plant another round of beans so that we're getting consistent harvests. Bush beans like these don't require support, but they do tend to produce all of their beans all at once, so you'll get this huge harvest, and then there's not that much after that. There are some things you can do to have more continual harvests, like succession planting, and you want to be harvesting the beans as they come onto the plant to encourage those plants to continue to produce more for you. So let's check back in a few days when these plants have sprouted. Okay, so we're back about 6 weeks after planting our bean seeds, and as you can see, our gardens have changed quite a bit. A lot happens in that amount of time in the spring and summer months. So now these plants are getting ready to produce their beans. There are flower buds forming all over the plants. It's very thick foliage here, and the plants are about 2 feet tall. You can even see some of the beans starting to form. They're less than 1 inch long at this point, but before you know it, there'll be beans just filling these bushes, and you'll be harvesting more than you know what to do with if you don't have a plan. So up to this point, we haven't really done much other than make sure that these plants have been well watered. The soil was amended with all-purpose organic fertilizer, and that's all these plants need to thrive. Some of the early plants were lost to pests. We have some chipmunks that like to nibble on seedlings, and there are some beetles that have been feeding on the plants, but that really shouldn't affect our yields at all. These plants are really healthy and doing well. So the benefit of planting bush beans is that you can plant a lot of them in a small location, and that will increase your yields for a relatively small footprint. But the drawbacks are that we're gonna get a lot of beans all at one time. So now, about 2 weeks before harvest, is a good time to make some plans for your beans. Maybe you wanna can some of them or plan to give them away to some of your family and friends. But there's really no maintenance to them. There's no pruning involved. There's really nothing we have to do for these plants other than wait for them to produce and harvest in a timely manner. So let's check back in a couple weeks when these are loaded with beans. Okay, so we're back exactly 2 weeks later and the beans are in full production. We have just tons of beans on all of these plants and they're already ready for harvest. So it happens really fast. You need to be prepared for it. And by harvesting at this time, you're going to encourage the plant to produce more beans for you over the following weeks. So picking beans is really simple. They come off really easily if you just grab a bean and pull. And that's one of our yellow beans. We have tons more on this plant. Here's a good example off of the same plant that I just harvested. We have this tiny bean here that's just starting to grow, but in maybe a week or so, that one will be full-sized and ready to pick as well. The best time to harvest your beans is just before using them, so you'll want to grab them off the plant, clean them indoors, and then cook them right away. Otherwise, they'll start to dry out and sort of thin out on you, so definitely harvest right before you eat them. I would harvest all the beans right now, but we're not going to be able to eat them all at this time. So over the next few days, we're going to be having beans for lunch and dinner, and hopefully over the following weeks, we'll get more and more off of these plants. So that's really it. String beans are one of our favorite crops to grow. They're just so simple. It's really a set it and forget it kind of plant. And you end up with a huge bounty in about 2 months. So you can plant this from early spring all the way through to midsummer. You can be planting your bean seeds and still getting a harvest before the end of the season. So if you have any tips for growing string beans, please let us know in the comments below and we'll see you next time.